Hello, I'm going to read to you one of my favorite stories. It's a true story. It's called Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot, the true story of the Berlin Airlift and the candy that dropped from the sky. So Mercedes is a 7-year-old girl who's living in Berlin during the airlift, and the chocolate pilot is a man by the name of Lieutenant Gail Halvorsen, and this is their story. Berlin, 1948. One late August day, Mercedes slipped her hand under the white chickens she kept in the small courtyard garden behind her apartment building. Please let there be eggs, she wished, as the silver-winged planes flew above like guardian angels. But like yesterday and the day before, the chickens' nests were empty, except for one small egg. Mercedes fed each chicken a worm and tried not to cry. She loved her 4-feathered pets, but Mama would not be happy. Eggs were more precious than gold in West Berlin during the Russian blockade. Tomorrow, I want an egg from each of you, she scolded the chickens sternly. Or Mama will say we cannot afford to keep you and must have you for dinner instead. Walking up the bomb-splintered steps to her apartment, Mercedes was sure her white chickens were just too scared of the thundering planes of the airlift to lay their eggs. Night and day they roared overhead like huge silver birds into nearby Tempelhof airfield to unload their supplies. But Mercedes would never complain about the great soaring grocery stores that everyone called raisin bombers, because they carried yummy raisins to eat. They carried flour and clothing and coal too. And something else. One day, Mama read her a newspaper story about the candy that came from the planes. The story told about the wonderful American chocolate pilot, Lieutenant Gail Halvorsen. Every day, he rained down sweets on the children who cheered the planes landing on Tempelhof's runway. As Mama read, Mercedes learned how the tall, friendly pilot had talked with these children one day at the fence near the runway's end. The children didn't ask him for candy, Mama read, only sweet freedom. Still, before he had to go, he searched his pocket for gum. But he found only 2 sticks, and there were 30 children. What did he do, Mama? Mercedes asked. He split the sticks for 4 lucky children, Mama read, and the others tore slivers of the foil to smell as their sweet treats. Then, even though he knew he could get into terrible trouble, the pilot promised the children he would drop gum and candy to them from his plane the next day. He stretched out his arms and told them to look for the wiggle of his plane's wings. That night, the pilot made small candy-filled parachutes from handkerchiefs, Mama read on, and he dropped them in secret to the children at the airfield the next day. He made 3 candy drops after that, before his troubles began. Children's letters addressed to the chocolate pilot and Uncle Wiggly Wings began to arrive at the airfield. Then a candy bar almost hit a reporter on his head. And the colonel in charge at Tempelhof read about the pilot's secret in the newspaper. He was caught. Did the colonel yell at him? Mercedes cringed. But Mama laughed and said, only a little. Then he shook his hand and told him to keep dropping and keep him informed. But won't he run out of candy? Mercedes asked, anxiously. But Mama laughed again. People from all over America now send the pilot handkerchiefs for parachutes and so much candy that it fills 2 large railroad boxcars. Mercedes heaved a sigh of relief. May I go catch some candy at Tempelhof too, Mama? She asked hopefully. Not by yourself, Liebchen, Frau Simon warned quickly. The streets are too dangerous with soldiers and rubble everywhere. But I promise to take you to the airfield soon to see the chocolate pilot, she said, hugging Mercedes close to her. Mercedes smelt the smoky scent that still lingered in Mama's blue dress from the time when the bombs had fallen during the war. She knew Mama cried quietly at night for Papa, who hadn't come back from the fighting. Don't worry, Mama. I'll stay close when we go, she said. I'll even walk with my toes in your shadow. Except when I run for the candy, she added happily. A few weeks later, as Mama promised, Mercedes stood at the airfield fence with the other hopeful children. Above her, thundering planes dropped out of the clouds, shaking the ground at her feet. Then a great cheer came up from the children when they spotted the wiggle of the chocolate pilot's wings. Suddenly, many small white parachutes floated down like marshmallow clouds. Mercedes ran excitedly with the other children, with her hands stretched high to capture the prize in the sky. But at the very last second, a large boy nearby reached up a little higher and grabbed the parachute drifting towards her. And oh, the look in his eyes as he bit into the silky smooth chocolate. It was all Mercedes could think about the whole sad way home. That night, listening to the sound of the plane's engines above her home, Mercedes wiped at tears. If only she had caught the chocolate, it wouldn't matter if the chickens laid eggs. The candy would make her and Mama so happy. But what could she do? Then Mercedes remembered from the newspaper that children wrote letters to the chocolate pilot. With the moon as her lamp, she got out of bed to write one too. Carefully, as she had learned in school, she penned, Dear Chocolate Pilot, we live near the airfield at Tempelhof, and our chickens think your airplanes are chicken hawks, so they become frightened when you fly over to land. They run in shelter, and some molt with no more eggs from them. It is a big problem for us. We need the eggs. But when you fly over the garden and see the white chickens, please drop some candy there and all will be okay. I don't care if you scare them. Your friend, Mercedes. Frau Simon mailed Mercedes' letter the next day, quietly keeping the thought behind her lips that such a busy pilot didn't have time to make every child's dream come true. But Mercedes now waited in the garden with the white chickens every day, wishing on each angel plane above for her candy to fall from the sky. Returning to Rhine-Main Air Force Base in Frankfurt, where he slept and ate between his 3 round-trip flights into Berlin each day, Lieutenant Gail Halvorsen put down a handful of letters on his cot. It was late October. For months now, children's letters with crayon-colored drawings arrived for him from all over Berlin. Each week, the many letters were translated by 2 German secretaries and given to Lieutenant Halvorsen. A few got his personal reply, but all the letters touched his heart, and some even made Lieutenant Halvorsen laugh till he cried. A 9-year-old boy, Peter Zimmerman, wrote the chocolate pilot that his legs were too short to run fast for the candy, so he drew him a map to his house and instructed, "Fly along the big canal. At the second bridge, turn right. I live in the bombed-out house on the corner. I'll be in the backyard every day at 2 p.m. Drop it there." Lieutenant Halvorsen tried to find Peter's house from the sky, but when he couldn't, he boxed up candy bars and gum and sent them to Peter's address by West Berlin post. But not before he heard from Peter again saying, "No chocolate yet? You're a pilot. I gave you a map. How did you guys win the war anyway?" Now, on this late October day, Lieutenant Halvorsen quietly opened today's letters. One by one, he read them. Then he lingered over a letter from a little girl with white chickens in her courtyard garden. He smiled and laughed and fought back a tear as he read, "We need the eggs, but when you fly over the garden and see the white chickens, please drop some candy there and all will be okay. Your little friend Mercedes." Lieutenant Halvorsen softly rubbed his head. His little friend's sweet hope was as fragile as the eggs and as precious to him as the white chickens were to her. But would he ever find the garden with the chickens? Even with Peter's map, he couldn't find his yard by the canal. As October days passed into November, a thick, soupy fog began to blanket Berlin's sky. Walking home with Mama, Mercedes prayed the pilots would be safe today. She prayed, too, that the fog would lift so the chocolate pilot could find her chickens in the yard at last. No candy had rained down yet. Maybe he had stopped looking for the chickens. "Please, don't forget me," Mercedes whispered to the white sky above. Frau Simon saw the troubled look on Mercedes' face. She squeezed her little hand with love, but said nothing. But once inside their apartment at 15 Hanselstrasse, Frau Simon couldn't wait to give Mercedes the surprise that had come for her earlier that day. It was a package mailed from Tempelhof Airfield, all neatly wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Quickly, Mercedes tore into the package. She opened the box. The sweet smell of candy spread thick as jam through the room. Chocolate bars, packs of white and green mint gum, pink bubble gum too, and lifesaver rolls, colored like the rainbow. Her chocolate pilot had found her at last. Mercedes saw Mama blinking back happy tears. She gave her a thick chocolate bar to eat and chose a creamy bar with nuts and caramel nugget for herself. She slipped off its wrapper and peeled back the silver foil. Little by little, she bit into the dark sweetness, letting the smooth taste melt away on her tongue. With each silky bite, she closed her eyes for a second as if she just tasted heaven. Inside the box was a letter from Mercedes. "My dear Mercedes, thank you for your small letter. Not every day I fly over your home, but surely often. I didn't know that in Hanselstrasse there lived such a nice little girl. If I could fly a few rounds over Friedman, I surely would find the garden with the white chickens. But for this there is not enough time. I hope that through what is with this letter, I give you a little joy. Your chocolate uncle, Gail Halvorsen. The memory of this day would stay with her for the rest of her life. A few months later, in January of 1949, Lieutenant Halvorsen thought of little Mercedes and Peter Zimmerman and all the children in Berlin as he flew out of Tempelhof for the last time. It didn't seem possible that a 7-month tour of duty in the Berlin Airlift had ended. He was sad to go, but as the clouds parted toward America, he smiled, knowing his candy drops to the children would go on with the help of trusted pilot friends. What Lieutenant Halvorsen didn't know that day was that his story in Berlin wasn't over. So here's the epilogue. And 22 years later, I'm gonna abbreviate it because it's very long. 22 years later, Colonel Halvorsen returned to Berlin. He was now in charge of Tempelhof Air Force. And one night in 1972, he received a dinner invitation to go visit a young mother of 2 boys. He went to an apartment building near Tempelhof Airfield. The young woman was the pilot, and the pilot was Mercedes. So that candy dropping forged a very long friendship. So I would love to read to you more about that, but this is getting long. So if you tune in and come visit me on Friday, I can read you the epilogue, the whole story, and I can tell you a little bit more about the Berlin Airlift. I hope you enjoyed the story.